Justice Clarence Thomas, for his part, apparently wasn't interested in any of these legal arguments. Instead, he implied that opposition to the Independent State Legislature Theory rested solely on partisanship rather than on constitutional principles. I can't. He seemed to think that Democrats only stood against this idea because it currently worked in favor of Republicans. In an effort to prove his point, he mused about whether or not the lawyer representing the Democratic voters who originally challenged the gerrymandered map, Neil Katyal, would argue with this pointed hypothetical. If the state legislature drew a map that was very generous to minority votes, but the state Supreme Court ruled that the map violated the state constitution, would Katyal and his clients still stand against it? It's a good question.
Is it
worthwhile? It's a worthwhile question.
It,
I mean, it has to be answered. It has to be answered.
Okay, but that doesn't make it a good question. Like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't, because surprising literally nobody, except for maybe Justice Thomas himself, Katyal said, yes, they would disagree with, they would agree or they would challenge this still, because it turns out that something that's dangerous for democracy is dangerous for democracy, no matter who benefits from it. Like, crazy that. And
right.
that's...
And I say it's a good question because in the process of outlining these arguments and developing a case, especially in public discourse, you have to ask these things so that people have the opportunity to answer them publicly. Like, so it's on record that, we would absolutely oppose that, because otherwise then you get this undercurrent of arguments where it's like, well, he didn't say that if they would, like,
my stance would be the same regardless of the benefactor, because the underlying issue is still an issue. And,
yes.
And that is what Katyal said. Like, yes, it's wrong no matter who benefits from it, which is unsurprisingly the sane thing to say. And it's something that I've noticed. This is a very tangential thing. There seems to be this mentality among people of certain political leanings that if the shoe were on the other foot, you wouldn't be so against it.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never actually seen that in play. In fact, there was this big speech on the floor of Congress that made it a big point of saying rules for thee and not for me like 1 billion times, and it was super duper annoying. But every example I've seen of people ignoring rules ever since then has been that party making the exceptions for themselves. And it really does feel to me like a lot of these accusations are like projections.
I think that's exactly what I was going to say. This is classic projection, right? The thing that we feel the most guilty for is what we accuse others of doing.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what this is.
Yeah. And I think it's just that in order to justify some of the things that these politicians and people, regular people, are doing, they have to make the assumption, they have to believe that their opponent or their enemy, which is a lot of the bent of the conversation around this, would do the same thing. Would actually probably do worse, So whenever this is this was a real question in court. Oh, this map would really benefit minorities. Would you still be upset, or would you still say that the court had the power to strike it down? Like, you're a hypocrite, aren't you? Like, no. One,
not a hypocrite, just really for accurate representation of the will of the people.
Yeah. It's not hard. And also, Justice Thomas, sir, even if I were a hypocrite, do you think I'd be stupid enough to admit it in court?
Right? In the transcript of the official record of the Supreme Court of the United States?
Nah.
Right. Okay. So if we even have to have this conversation, like if this case has made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, how doomed is our democracy?
Well, we have real concerns. Don't get us wrong. But it seems like this current challenge, this one, isn't going to be the one that brings us down. knock on wood, I'm hoping, right? I don't want to jinx it, evil eye, spit, whatever. Even if this theory is accepted by the Supreme Court, even if they come down in favor of the Republican legislature on this one, which seems unlikely given their current stances that we just summarized for you, it isn't the death knell yet. I mean, again, super bad. Super bad. However, even though the election clause does, well, I don't even have Invisalign, even though the election clause does give state legislatures pretty broad powers, very broad powers, in specifically presidential elections, the U.S. Constitution and federal law control when presidential electors are chosen in a state. And this is important. Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution empowers Congress to choose when presidential electors will be chosen. Literally, it says the time they will be chosen. Subsequently, federal law establishes that electors are chosen on Election Day, which is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November.